Yet, even at our current level of knowledge, we are beginning to find answers to questions about some of humanity's greatest afflictions. Many neurological disorders and mental illnesses can be traced to chemical imbalances in the synapses of the brain. We have already touched on some of the consequences of neurochemicals gone awry. In Part 2, we will take a closer look at the chemical basis of a number of mental disorders.
The year was 1948. The patient, insane beyond hope. For 20 years, he was kept in a locked ward in a psychiatric hospital, suffering from a condition of extreme agitation and excitement known as mania. When a psychiatrist named John Cade began treating the patient with an experimental substance called lithium, few expected positive results. Indeed, it seemed as if the experiment was destined for failure, when after several days, the patient showed no signs of improvement. Then, on the 5th day, things began to change. The patient became less excited. He began to carry on coherent conversations with the staff. Within 3 weeks, he was transferred to an unlocked unit where he continued to show improvement. 3 months after swallowing the first lithium dose, the patient was released from the hospital, marking a new era in the treatment of mental illness. Soon, hundreds of thousands of psychiatric patients would follow, each a beneficiary of Cade's remarkable discovery. Cade's work helped open the door to a new way of thinking about mental illness. It raised the intriguing possibility that some forms of mental illness can be understood through biochemical models. In Part 2, we will take a close look at new discoveries concerning the biochemical nature of a variety of disorders, including depression, schizophrenia, and antisocial behavior.
Because it is difficult to peer directly into the brain of a living human being, most of our information about neurochemistry has been gathered indirectly through animal studies, blood and urine analysis, or by observing the way drugs affect behavior. Yet these traditional research methods, combined with new techniques for visualizing the brain, have rapidly expanded our knowledge of neurochemistry. There is now good reason to believe that many mental disorders, once thought to be strictly psychological, may have a biochemical basis. Dr. William Bunney, Jr., chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California in Irvine and a well-known pioneer in the study of brain chemistry and mental illness, explains.
As I'm talking to you right now, many of your 2 billion neurons in your brain, particularly your visual and your auditory or hearing circuits, are working actively now, releasing neurotransmitters. The impulses are buzzing through those particular circuits. Now, in your brain, these are working normally. Now, the hypothesis in a number of the mental illnesses, including depression and schizophrenia, is that there is some dysfunction in these processes. And to use an analogy, if you were going to attack an enemy, you might blow up their bridges. Well, this is a critical bridge in the brain, this bridge between neurons, this synapse, it's called. And the hypothesis is that there is a disruption in this process. There's something wrong with the movement of the neurotransmitters across this gap.
A current focus of neurochemical research is the area of mood disturbance or affective disorder. The majority of researchers today believe that some mood disturbances, particularly certain forms of depression, involve chemical imbalances in the brain. One of the most carefully studied affective disorders is known as manic depressive illness. This disorder, which afflicts millions of Americans each year, is divided into two major types: bipolar and unipolar. Patients referred to as bipolar experience extreme shifts in mood. They alternate between periods of deep depression, known as the depressive phase, and periods of reckless energy and excitement, known as the manic phase. Other manic depressive patients are referred to as unipolar because they experience only the depressive phase. During these periods of depressions, they may have suicidal thoughts and be unable to sleep and eat normally. Today, there is increasing evidence that both bipolar and unipolar manic depressive illness may involve abnormalities in brain chemistry. Although further research is needed, scientists have arrived at a tentative explanation known as the catecholamine hypothesis. According to the catecholamine hypothesis, the manic depressive sudden mood swings may be related to corresponding shifts in levels of certain neurotransmitters, particularly norepinephrine. Low levels of norepinephrine are believed to accompany depression, while high levels appear to accompany manic periods.
Although the catecholamine hypothesis was introduced in 1965, its origins reach back some 2 decades earlier. At that time, tuberculosis patients were being treated with a new drug known as iproniazid. Doctors noticed that this new drug had a curious side effect. It tended to lift the spirits of the patients. When researchers gave the same drug to clinically depressed psychiatric patients, they found similar results. Without having the slightest idea of how it worked, the researchers had stumbled upon the first antidepressant drug. By the early 1960s, research temporarily shifted to another psychoactive drug known as reserpine. Unlike iproniazid, which seemed to relieve depression, reserpine was known to actually cause depressive symptoms in otherwise normal people. But when reserpine was taken together with iproniazid, these depressive symptoms were eliminated. Scientists hoped that by discovering how reserpine worked in the brain, they might gain insight into certain forms of depression, and they might learn how antidepressant drugs relieve these symptoms. Working with laboratory animals, researchers soon discovered that reserpine tends to deplete the brain of certain neurotransmitters, particularly norepinephrine. They wondered if a deficiency of norepinephrine was somehow related to depression. The case for norepinephrine was further strengthened by new discoveries about iproniazid. It was found that this drug worked by inhibiting the action of monoamine oxidase, MAO, the enzyme responsible for deactivating norepinephrine in the neuron. When the MAO enzymes are prevented from doing their job, norepinephrine is allowed to accumulate, making more of the neurotransmitter available for release and binding with the norepinephrine receptor sites.
These discoveries eventually led to the development of more modern antidepressant drugs. One group is known as MAO inhibitors. They are very similar to iproniazid in that they increase norepinephrine levels by inhibiting the MAO enzymes. A second group of antidepressant drugs is known as tricyclics. They are also believed to increase norepinephrine levels, although they achieve this by a very different means. You may recall that certain neurotransmitters, including norepinephrine, are removed from the synapse through a reuptake system. This reuptake system is sometimes called an amine pump. Researchers believe that tricyclic antidepressants work by somehow blocking this amine pump. When the reuptake pump is blocked, norepinephrine accumulates in the synapse and the antidepressant effects are achieved.